Dr. McRae. I'm Elizabeth Kumari. I'm the Vice President of our Professional Exchanges here at Cultural Vistas and our legal counsel. I primarily oversee our J1 visas that are incoming, so around 4,600 or so of those. And so I'm really excited also to have the University of Waterloo here. We work with them on a daily basis. But now we're ready to get to our meat of the program. Our first panel, Corporate America and the Workforce of Tomorrow. And I will turn it over to moderator Jacquie Davidson, who in addition to being the head of global mobility for Adobe, she wins the prize of traveling farthest to come today.
All right, thank you. Good morning. As Lizzie said, I'm Jacquie Davidson. I'm the head of global mobility at Adobe and shared services for Asia Pacific as well. So I did come from Sydney, Australia last week, coincided with a business trip. So I'm excited to be here and thank you for joining us this morning. So let me introduce our panelists today. We've got a great group of people to chat with. First, we've got Bernard Coleman down here at the end. Bernard's the Global Head of Diversity and Inclusion at Uber. And before that, he was the Chief Diversity and HRO for Hillary for America. And he's held several roles with the DNC, including Chief Diversity Officer and Director of HR. And outside of the corporate world, his contributions extend beyond that. He serves on the boards of Paladin, Tides Advocacy, and our own Cultural Vistas. So he's an ambassador for the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, and he's also a contributor to the Forbes Coaches Council. So welcome, Bernard, thank you. And the next to Bernard, we have Derek Wilkinson. He's a partner in Odgers, Berndtson in Washington, D.C. He's also the head of the International Development Practice as well. Derek's got over 20 years of executive search experience, and he's got a particular focus on the international development community, including clients in the for-profit, non-profit, public sectors, as well as multilaterals, NGOs, and NGOs, associations, and affinity groups, and educational institutions as well. He specializes in recruitment from board level to general management. And has experience from several search firms, global search firms, boutique search firms. So I think Derek's well placed to talk about the future workforce and what skills and talents will be needed. And then next to me here we have Steve Feyer. He's the Director of Product Marketing at Eightfold, a company that Gartner named a cool vendor in human capital management for talent acquisition. Through his work and contributions at companies like iThreat Cyber Group, IntegraChain, Aptus, Steve stopped digital privacy, counterfeiting, and spam. So thank you for the last one in particular. And he played a key role in growing IntegraChain from a startup to getting acquired. And he was also the first MBA intern at Enki, which was a consumer product robotics maker. So interesting stuff. So with his extensive product marketing intelligence and diverse experience across a number of products and spaces, Steve would say that he is a full stack product marketer. So his passion is business changing, emerging tech, and his thought is if you build it, he can sell it. So great, welcome, great to have you guys here today. So we're talking about the future of the workforce with regards to tech and artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics. So when you think about the future of the workplace and how technology is going to impact and influence that. What are your thoughts about that? Where do you see the future headed? So, Steve, you want to start?
Sure. Well, thank you for the nice introduction. It's wonderful to see everyone here. So, we hear a lot about automation, and it certainly is the, I think, dominant trend we see today in the workforce. I recently read a study that about 34% of work is automated today, and that is accelerating very quickly. It's going to be over 50% in 5 years. So that's a very scary thought for a lot of people. A lot of people have found their professions disrupted by automation technology, whether that's robotics in warehouses, whether that's pending driverless car technology, hundreds and hundreds of examples. But you can't eliminate people from jobs. That's simply not possible. There's never going to be such a thing as a robot-owned company. And I think you also see that people who can embrace automation are finding themselves more successful in the jobs and the jobs that are changing today. So I don't think that automation is going to take jobs away from people, but people who can use the automation technology relevant to their jobs will inherit those jobs from people who cannot use that automation. And that's going to be a dominant trend in the coming years.
Okay, great.
I'd say one thing that I see a lot of is how automation and use of technology and collaborative technology especially actually ends up putting more burden of work on an individual, especially when someone is working globally. They're expected to be able to do the jobs of 2 or 3 people in many cases, not because roles are going unfilled, and there are roles that are going unfilled, no question, but because we have all these wonderful tools. We need you to work across 5 time zones to get all of this done, and the staff that you have is this. So I see that it actually creates a lot more burden on the individual, which has mental and emotional and physical health impacts, which I think we're just starting to touch on. So I'd say that's probably going to be a trend as well.
Interesting, great. Bernard.
This is interesting. Is my mic working? Okay. When I think about the future of work and AI and machine learning, I think people need to view it with what it is as a tool. And you use tools to be more effective at your work, more effective at being successful. So I think when people over-index on the power of the tool and it displacing human workers, I think you have to marry the two. Like when I think about AI, people think it's a cure for all, but I think it can be deeply flawed. So like I work in diversity and inclusion, so if I take my implicit biases or my unconscious bias and I'm plugging it into AI, it's going to put out flawed results. So I think people need to use it as a tool and recognize its limitations. I'm not going to say AI is going to solve everything, machine learning is going to solve everything. Like I'd still use a hammer or a screwdriver. It has its place in how we adapt to the future, but I don't think we should say like, I think we put a lot of fear in what AI can do and machine learning can do. I just think we need to recognize its role in terms of helping us adapt and just grow and be more industrious.
So it sounds like really kind of harnessing what's out there and understanding what it can do. You know, I think Elon Musk famously said earlier this year that he felt like AI was more dangerous than nuclear weapons and that we really needed to regulate it. And I think actually what he said was, it's insane. And then I think there's a lot of feedback about that as well, especially from the tech sector, who's obviously very behind AI. So do you see any dangers? I mean, Derek, you already talked a little bit about some of the emotional impact, people losing their jobs.
Yeah.
When we think about when I think about driverless cars, right? Truck drivers, taxi drivers, Uber drivers, lots of people out there. I mean, self-driving cars looks like it's coming.
Well, I think one aspect of it is that people can lose their jobs, but I think we are doing a fairly good job collectively, not in the structured ways it probably should be done, but to exposing people to more and more technologies, sometimes accidentally, sometimes as part of their job. But the worry that I'm starting to see, and especially because of the way that I recruit people to go from one organization to another organization, we have to take into account what their emotional well-being is associated with, and exploited too, by the way. You're not happy here, so I'm going to recruit you elsewhere. But what we start to have are questions that are being asked. What's going to be required of me? What's really going to be required of me? Which means that our stakeholder intake and the due diligence that we have to do about a role, whether it's a CEO role or lower in the organization, we have to be able to give them an understanding of, a candid understanding. Here's what the environment is like. Here's what you would be hired to do as a change agent. And here are the lingering problems, some of which can be solved by automation, some of which people are afraid of regarding automation and change, just change management generally. But the emotional health piece, my organization just did a study about this. The emotional health piece associated with work is more associated with responsibility increases rather than loss of actual employment. It's this more and more is expected of the individual because automation can help that individual. And that's just something that it's kind of squishy at this point from the perspective of many people. We don't have as much understanding of what it actually means and what the impact's going to be.
Steve, any thoughts about that?
So Elon Musk is a really smart guy, and he's a lot smarter than I am. So I have to listen to what he and others like him say.
Sure.
But I'm not so worried about this in the immediate future. I've spoken to some other roboticists and experts who think that, if not never, this is just something which is fundamentally not about to happen right now. We can talk about mining asteroids in space and conceptualize it, but it's not going to happen like this decade or
Sure.
next decade or the one after that.
So the singularity's not coming next year. or anything
Right,
like that.
right. All the AI we have today is so-called weak AI. Weak AI meaning that it is a data analysis. It can be very complex, very sophisticated. It can be recursive. It can use its results and learnings to improve itself. You can have multiple programs that feed off each other, but at some point it has to stop and have a human intervene, take an action, use the result, whatever that may be, because it can only answer one problem, one question. A strong AI, I think what Elon Musk and others are worried about, is a AI which could essentially create its own problem and then solve it. Whether it does that like a human does may be somewhat irrelevant, because at that point it could be considered to be thinking. But no one has been able to figure out how to program that yet.
Okay, keeping my fingers crossed. So, Steve, can you talk a little bit about Eightfold, the company that you're at? And we
Absolutely.
talk about finding the right candidate. What are the future skill sets that are going to be necessary? So, but if you can tell the folks what Eightfold does, and there's a number of companies that that are doing what you guys are doing, but what is that exactly?
I like to think we're doing something a little bit
bit
different.
different,
there.
sorry about that,
No, of course. So Eightfold is a great example of what you can do with AI using the best capabilities of technology today. We are transforming talent for companies by helping them take a truly holistic view of all the information they have. Maybe put a simpler way, if you could answer questions about talent the way that you can answer questions using Google, that's what Eightfold could do.
So I'm a talent person at a company looking to do some hiring, and I use Eightfold, and it's going to help me do what? Screen people's candidates, resumes, info.
Sure. So today you may have to go out and recruit people, search a lot of different systems you have for keywords. With Eightfold, you can get all of the people you have in your applicant tracking system, your human resource information systems, everyone you've recruited, everyone who has come to your website. All that information can be used to immediately give you a list of people who meet your requirements.
And as Bernard was talking about, kind of bias data in, bias data out, how does that get accounted for?
That's an interesting point, because AI it can be biased if you put bias in it. Our AI does not have bias in it. It's designed so that it does not take account of categories that you might be concerned about from a hiring perspective.
Interesting. Okay, I have to learn more about that. Bernard, going to you. One of the things I took a look at online is you did an article last year talking about. There was a lot of talk about the fact that we don't have a diverse workforce is that there's just not the pipeline for it. And Bernard has come back and said, that's a myth. That's not the case at all. It's not because we don't have a pipeline for it. There are people out there who meet the criteria. It's just that we're not, there's a couple things we're not doing right. So I'm paraphrasing your article a little bit, so correct me if I'm wrong. But what you basically said, look, the lack of diversity is about sourcing differently. We need to source differently. We need to overcome our hidden bias. Investing in STEM early is going to be key, and we really need to look at current staff and non-traditional students to retrain and upskill them. So can you talk a little bit more about that? And then also, as we look for more diverse candidates, as we look to retrain and upskill people, how do you see the AI, the tech fitting into that?
So I thought a lot about what people could be doing, and I think about recruiters, and there is this incongruence in terms of how we recruit, because let's say I have to hire 50 people per month, and if I found my formula to get me 50 people per month, which gives me my bonus, if it takes me a lot longer to find diverse hires, if I have to change my formula, there's no incentive for me to do so. So even if I really care about diversifying the workforce, I do care about my bonus. I do care about hitting my goals in terms of performance. So you're pitted against yourself. So it works against what we're ultimately saying we want to achieve. So I think that's one problem, and I think the other part is we need to look in different places. When people say, we couldn't find anyone, well, where are you looking? If you keep going to the same place, if I were a fisherman and I go to my fishing hole and I'm like, man, there's no fish left. Well, let's keep fishing. That would be, I'd starve. And that's what's happening within industry. People are starving because they aren't going to other places. It takes a little longer to scout it out, find it, but once you find those talent pools, then you could then go and pull great talent. You just have to do a little more work. It's like anything else. Like I remember when I would paint my house, you have to do all the prep. If you do the prep, then you have a better job painting it. Otherwise, you just paint it up like a terrible product. And then, so I think it's a lot of times also hiring managers, like people want to affirm their greatness. And so what I mean by that is, let's say I went to X school. I'm like, oh, that person's an X graduate like me. They must be good because I'm good. And then it becomes self-perpetuating because I'm affirming my greatness in the people that I hire. And that's a lack of, you're not going to recognize that bias, but that is a huge bias. And what a lot of us do. In my younger years, I would do that. I remember there was a woman who went to my same undergrad and grad school. I said, she's going to be awesome. She was, but that's not always going to play out. So it's just really important to think like, am I really finding the best talent? Am I hiring for comfort or am I hiring for competency? And you have to kind of look at your biases and own those and then say like, what can we be doing? Because we say our stated mission is this. How are we living up to it? So it's a matter of that. And back to the point about looking within your systems. Again, a lot of times with recruiting, once you find your first place winner, you never look at second place. And there's a whole repository of people who are just sitting there who wanted to work at your organization. You know that. You put the time and interview them. You know what their skill sets are. We had a person we hired and it was really close. And the runner-up was like almost like a coin flip. To not revisit that candidate at a later point when other positions come up is a waste of our effort and time. So there's a whole pool of people just sitting right within your systems. If you could accurately go through it, like Eightfold and others, you could find that talent and save yourself a lot of time and get your bonus in terms of what you're shooting for recruiting. You could live up to the mission of trying to find more diverse talent and kind of eliminate some of those biases because you are opening up the aperture, if you will, to find talent. So you just have to get more creative. You just can't go with the tried and true way.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you. And Derek, the piece about upskilling and retraining, I know that's an area that you're particularly interested in and passionate about.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts about how we can
Absolutely.
do that?
I mean, everything that you said there is just fantastic gospel. I wish I had a lot of clients who thought the way that you think, because I've always said, I've been in the talent business my entire career, there is no talent shortage. It doesn't exist. It is there's a need to identify that there are skill sets from one sector or one environment or one ecosystem that can be moved to another. And in fact, that's an area that I tend to specialize in. Mostly my clients like it, some of them don't like it. And the reason that they don't like it is because of what you said. Like hires like. And I tend to do a lot of work, as was mentioned before, with international public sector entities, multilateral development banks. And there is a notion in some of those institutions that the only people that can do what we do are the people that are doing it now. And we need a whole bunch more people, so go find them. Well, wait a minute, you said that they're all in your group, why don't you know who they are? And a lot of what you're talking about, it does exist right in our own systems, and they forget about it or lose that data. But the other thing is looking at it through a different set of lenses, looking at what do you need done, and what is your sense of how this particular job is done inside of your sector or your institution right now. Who's doing the same thing better elsewhere? And how do we expand the pools that we look in for candidates who can come in and bring best practices from other organizations, best practices from other sectors, getting past the discomfort and the fear and the perceived risk of, oh, if somebody's not from global health, there's no way they can go into global health and do the work in global health because we all know what we're talking about and they don't. It's going to be too much of a learning curve. Well, then you're always going to be dealing with a diminishing talent pool. And so some of it, yes, of course, has to happen at the educational level, but a great deal of it can happen mid-career and throughout careers. If organizations will look at things differently, get rid of unconscious bias, and unconscious bias is insidious, it's everywhere. And you find it in absolutely every part of any recruitment, regardless of the organization. And it just has to be recognized and nudged away from on a regular basis. But there's plenty of talent out there, and it just happens to be in different buckets.
We need to look at it a little bit differently. When I worked at Google, one of the kind of internal mottos, informal internal mottos, was hire smart people and they'll figure it out. So you didn't have to have necessarily a specific skill. They felt like you could do this job. Hey, we're going to give you a try. We're going to do something a little bit different. And bringing in a different perspective, I think, can also be really helpful in roles as well. If you look at it with a little bit different lens and think a little bit differently. Okay, so I'm a talent recruiter in 5 years, or let's say I'm a candidate in 5 years. I go to a talent recruiter, I'm trying to find a job. What kind of skills am I going to need in 5 years? I'm probably going to be applying for a job that doesn't even exist today, right? So what should I be working on now so that I'm prepared for the job of the future? Or let's say I've got, a couple of freshmen in high school who are going to be going to university. What might they be studying? And then what should they be studying so that they can get employed so that I don't have to support them anymore? That's my real goal. So. What do you think?
All right, I'll throw one out there. Engineering and software programming are very important. Not everyone needs to be a Google level engineer, so I would maybe just simplify it to formal logic. Understanding formal logic so that you can troubleshoot the robots that you're going to be managing.
Okay, excellent, great.
I'd say learn how to learn. Know how to gain new knowledge. Be agile in your thinking. Be flexible in your thinking. If you're closed-minded, you're going to miss it.
Yeah, piggybacking off of that, there's a book, it's called Fixed Mindset versus Growth Mindset. Some of you might be familiar with it. And I remember when I was a child, I probably had a fixed mindset because I thought if I were that smart, I'd have to automatically achieve these things. But as I've gotten older, I realized I have a growth mindset in certain aspects where like I keep getting better. After I put the time in and the practice in, I'm getting better. So I've adjusted my mind in terms of what I think success is and what I can achieve. So if I were looking to get into what's next, just be you're being adaptive and recognizing that I don't know that, therefore I can't ever learn it. If you put those limitations on yourself, then you won't. I'd say that's really important. And I think, when we think about cryptocurrencies and blockchain, to me that's really exciting and interesting because it's kind of uncharted territory. So if you're in a fintech and you're doing it now, and then by 5 years from now maybe it's fully solidified, you would have been the foremost person doing this because you know more about it than others. I think that's a good place to go. I'm really interested in it just because I don't know much about it, but it seems really exciting.
Great. Thank you. I want to make sure that we have time to get to some questions from the audience, because I think people probably have a lot of things to ask. But any last words, last thoughts that you want to share with the audience and the viewers about tech and the future of the workplace? Good, bad, can't stop it, so get on board quickly. Anyone?
I'd say that, look, the evolution continues to happen. Technology is always going to get better and better, and there's going to be more of it. But good old-fashioned values, a work ethic, and an open mind are what help people adapt to it. That's really what matters, and being culturally sensitive, whether it's to another country's culture or to the culture of another organization, and knowing how to navigate it quickly is what really gets people ahead the fastest from the perspective that I have, putting people into new organizations.
And I'll say, again, these are all tools, and tools are only effective if you know how to use them. So you have to be agile and say, I don't know how to use that yet, but I can figure it out. There's lots of tutorials. Everyone wants to explain and teach these things. You can go on YouTube, and you can be a self-studier. And if you keep approaching it that way, at least you have the aptitude to learn. Just keep adapting.
So maybe a little thing, but I've noticed the last few years that virtual collaborations move toward video And I think that's really helpful, especially this issue of cultural collaboration and making sure that you're fully there, even if you're not physically there. I've personally found that to be extraordinarily helpful. So I'm hoping that's something we're going to continue to see more of a push toward.
It's a great point, and I'll add something to that as a recruiter. Always be prepared that whatever conversation you're going to have on an electronic device, that you expect it to be video, because it will be. The number of people that I have conversations with around the world and say, "Oh, can you see me on the camera? I can't see you." "Oh, this is going to be video?"
Well, to that point, that's really transformed business over the last however many years,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
It's made all the difference in the world. Businesses are saving money because people don't have to travel. You can work, internationally very easily, except when everybody wants to get their time zone in the right time frame, right? And also remote working, right? It changes the whole structure of the workplace in some ways. Remote workers, people working from home, people working in different locations. It really, things have changed so much. Sometimes I feel like a very old person. Things have changed so much even in the last 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. I can't even imagine what's coming in the next 5 to 10. So.
I think the advent of video technology for these kinds of collaborative communications is because we still want the human element. You still want to interact with the person. I noticed after September 11th that the increase in the use of video technology for interviewing, even my interviews with candidates, but interviews with candidate and client, they went on the increase, and they continue to increase because they still want that human element. And if you can't be there because of the cost consideration, sometimes for my clients, they've got good technology and they want to see what your expression is and how you comport yourself.
Right.
Absolutely. And we want to open it up for any audience questions. Yes, please, Howard.
I have one. I wanted to add just an experience as an HR practitioner. In my organization, we do not have a big challenge finding talent, even clinical or technical talent. What we have a big problem is once we get them and they move into supervisory positions, having good supervisors and management. And I'm managing right now, leading a leadership development program that has 13 elements, and I'm not going to get all of them, but they're leadership, ethics, emotional intelligence, communications, change management, team building and management, innovation, diversity, inclusion, strategic thinking, decision making, and business acumen. I'm missing 2 or 3, but those things can be taught. And as Barnard said, with the growth thing, as you learn and you experience things, you get better. We found that, and I share what you all said of things we need to add, and I may add that to a future iteration of the program, but we found one of the biggest things is getting people to understand that there's a difference being an expert in what you do and then managing a team of experts to get them to add value to an organization. Very different skill sets, and as HR people, and universities, I don't think some business schools and MBA programs touch on some of this, but I don't personally think that they address it in an integral, cohesive way. We all need to do more in that regard.
And actually, our next panel about the role of higher education in preparing students will go right to that. Shabnam, I think you had a question.
Thank you. Amazing thoughts. And I'm going to take an educational lens at them. The rate at which the world of work is changing, it's almost impossible for universities to be the sole generators of academic knowledge. So you're preparing these kids to come to you, and there's a codependence between universities and the industry. So how do you see companies such as yours being co-educators in that process of skills development, in addition to just providing internship opportunities?
Embedded curriculum. What I saw one time was, I think it was Northrop Grumman or Lockheed Martin, but they would have certain campuses near where they would do shipbuilding and embed their curriculum to really help upskill those students. Because if you knew your track and you really wanted to do that, you pretty much have a guaranteed profession coming out of school because you are doing their curriculum. Same thing with HR, like SHRM. I used to work at SHRM, so obviously I'm partial. But I thought that was great that some places are almost embedding their curriculum, so that way you are truly prepared for when you enter the workforce. Because the thing about getting a job is, one, feeling included, but also being able to thrive and know you feel more supported, you feel like you're more equipped if you have that curriculum and that knowledge. That's what an internship helps with, but if you actually know like specifically the language of the land at X company, I feel more like I'm going to be successful and hit the ground running. So I think if you have embedded curriculums, and I know every college isn't going to necessarily do that, but there might be some where it makes sense. I think that is a great way to help ensure kids are successful, that they're gainfully employed, and that they stay for a while.
My sector is absolutely the worst at helping solve that problem because we're hired to focus on go get this subject matter expert, the absolute perfect person, or the 5 perfect people. But my firm actually has taken a bit of a left turn on that. We are trying to focus on ensuring that the experience of an individual with whom we interact is very different from what they usually experience with search. What you usually experience with search, unfortunately, is we only love you as long as we need you. So we're never going to call you back and tell you that you didn't get the job, but we're going to call you 6 months later and act like we're best buddies. We will never really give you the feedback that you need that's developmental so that you can not make the same mistake again. Little things like that. So we're trying to change the whole paradigm on that. And we're clunking our way through it because we're still search people who are hired to find subject matter experts or managers or both in the same person, which is not always the easiest thing to do. But where I've seen it with clients that it works is exactly that embedded curriculum, corporate universities that adapt to 2 things. One, keeping the organization with which someone is working an interesting, thoughtful, caring place to work that they are proud of staying at, and also professionally developing them and saying out loud, hey, listen, we know we're going to develop you, and even though we're trying to make this the greatest place for you to stay, go. Take what you learned here and stay a friend in the organization. And that's where the corporate universities that win the greatest awards every year are the ones that have that attitude, and it's developmental, and they even stay in touch with former employees in that way. Professional services firms are pretty good about that. But it's a partnership. When organizations can come to an organization, a search firm like ours, and say, find me the best person, that actually diminishes, and I'm not selling the sector right now very well, but it is a problem. It is a continuous problem that we have in the search and the recruitment business. Because we want to convince everybody, we've got the talent, we've got everybody that you need. You want us, and you want us thinking for you. But that's not what clients want. They want thoughtful engagement and consultation on kind of the subjects we've been talking about today. So the organizations that are, frankly, the ones that we consider academy companies, the ones that we want to recruit out of and put them elsewhere, are the ones that do the best job at sharing that knowledge with people that come in from beginning of their career or even near the end of their career.
Great. Any other questions? Yes, please, Jared.
So my name is Jared Johnson. I work for the German Center for Research and Innovation here in New York, but I'm from Eastern Kentucky, and this question is kind of going to come from that perspective. So a lot of this discussion has been about how the world is going to change, how jobs are going to change with automation, with machine learning, etc. But there are entire populations and regions of the world, and even here in the United States, that were not included in the digital revolution in the first place, let alone what's going to come after. So do you all have any thoughts on how vulnerable populations or places in the world where these jobs don't exist in the first place can also be included in this discussion?
I think distributed workforce is going to be the way of the future. I think, just like for instance, I currently live outside of San Francisco. I think it's the most expensive place in America right now, which makes it very difficult to attract talent because you're going to go, I really want that job, but I don't want to live there because the standard of living is so high. I think we have to start looking at the models differently. If you are in Eastern Kentucky, why can't you be distributed workforce and work from home there? I think, GitHub? 60% of the staff sits elsewhere, outside of the HQ, and it's working. So I think as more of those models occur, where you can see those success metrics in terms of companies having a distributed workforce. They can go to Eastern Kentucky, they can go to Cincinnati, they can go to all these different places, find the talent there, I don't have to move, I increase the standard of living there, and then you could then, it creates a business case for like, we should keep going there, and like what I call them rising cities can kind of rise up to. But it just takes a few bold companies to do so.
I've noticed with companies that come into the United States market, they tend to have a different perspective on doing that, the similar perspective that we American companies have when looking at Europe. Ireland was a great example. Years ago, people said, hey, let's set up operations in Ireland because they speak English, they're highly educated, the cost of living is low, we can have a really good employee base here. So European and Asian companies that are starting to come to the United States do that. They look at places like southwestern Virginia, eastern Tennessee, where you have high degree of education, but it's not always, the courage to do it is not always there. And they usually are setting up a bricks and mortar operation there, which doesn't necessarily give those new skills. So that's kind of a poor answer to what you're talking about. It is something that has to be worked on, and it's going to be, it may take activist potential employees to do it. That may be an idea. This is something we were talking about before. But there is change that needs to happen. I deal with global South countries and recruiting people out of them, and organizations that support people and create small and medium enterprises in those global South countries. And what happened and continues to happen in those is that through the use of mobile communications, they're educating people and they're creating enterprising folks who are entrepreneurial and demonstrating that they have capability and they're getting tied together. We're not doing that for many parts of our own country. There's a bigger argument to be made there, I think.
Great question. And yes, please.
I wanted to go back to the topic of AI from earlier. So I do work in the engineering field, so this topic it's pretty close to home for me. So we're in a room right now of, I'd say, pretty, I don't want to say like-minded, but similar level type of people, right? So we're just all nodding our heads saying, yes, of course, it makes sense that, hire smart people because they'll learn, or, in 5 years, like, people can learn these logic skills or programming skills, and, we're all nodding our heads and saying, like, yes, that's doable, but the thing is that the jobs that these AI, that AI is replacing, they're not of our ability or stature or means. So what is the actual solution of replacing these truck drivers that are going to have automated systems, or replacing farmers even, or replacing military folks? Because anything that a human can do, a machine can do better, more accurately, and faster. So yes, we can talk about the university kids of the future, like learning these skills. But what do you do with the middle-aged folks that those people are going to be displaced? So what is the actual solution?
No, it's a great question. No. It's a great
Just,
question, and I think we asked that question earlier when we brought up the truck drivers
Right.
and people who are doing automated assembly line kind of things or things like that. You've got, or even some of the financial work that's getting taken. You don't need to have somebody input stuff into Excel. You just have an OCR that just takes care of everything and does the computations and pays the bills and all of that. So
I think it's a two-part deal. So the two-part is you have to be open to retraining. If you're going to try to hang on to the industry that you know is going away, you're always staving off that. You're trying to fight the inevitable. And I see that a lot where people are like, we got to save this industry, and it's like erosion. Erosion's going to happen. There's nothing you can do to reclaim that land. It's just going to keep eroding. So you have to have the foresight. So that's the hard part of changing someone's mindset about because that's very personal. I'm losing my livelihood. But if you're open to retraining, there's a whole bunch of other avenues for you. And so I think you have to start helping them understand early on, it looks like this. When I know when something's coming, I can plan for it. Is anyone telling them that? Do they know that? Or are they just shocked? And it happens maybe the execs knew, and time to pack up and leave. I remember where my father's from. He's from Danville, Virginia. And they had the one industry in town was the Dan River Mill. Everybody worked at the mill. And they had protectionist policies that no other business would come because they wanted everyone to work in the mill. And then textiles started going overseas and China and everything, and then the Anvil mill got wiped out. And it really hurt the Anvil a lot. So those execs knew it was coming, but they were getting as much as they could in the moment, and then they're like, well, we're out of here, we lost. So I think you have to help people understand, like, your industry, this is the shelf life we see for it, this is what we need to be doing to retool it. Some of the things we do at Uber, we're looking at what are the competencies people need to move to the next rung within, to retrain within Uber, which hopefully helps people stay longer, and always being improved so that way they can be more marketable to move around within the company. I think that's the smarter play executives should do versus waiting for it to end and just getting all that they can and extract and then rolling out, which is a very short-term perspective.
So we've often heard AI called the fourth industrial revolution. And one thing that's not talked about enough about the Industrial Revolution, I think, is that it was a political revolution, ultimately. And I think that a large part of the answer to this incredibly difficult problem is it's going to eventually be political as well. Within the technological realm, though, it is about motivation. I mean, this comment, this idea that you just want to hire smart people, well, I would slightly rephrase that as you want to hire motivated people who will want to do the work that's going to be available and be excited about that kind of retraining and that kind of work. So, you know, in the past years, you saw millions of people work as mechanics, and many of those kinds of jobs became IT jobs, and I think those are going to ultimately become robotic maintenance jobs, and that's something that people are going to do. There's an infinite amount of demand. There's always going to be work available and jobs that can be created if we create the system and honestly have the courage to create the system to enable it.
This is a little blue sky, but I've been hoping, and it happens in a few pockets around the country, but the community college system is something that if corporations were able to partner and invest in those, because the federal government probably isn't going to, there have been fits and starts about that. But if that were to happen, especially in rural states or states where, you know, Rust Belt states where you've got a lot of people who are mechanics or lower level engineers, that could be a solution. But again, there's got to be the political courage for that to happen.
Great. I think we have time for one more question.
It's okay.
Okay, so I'm in the back row.
I just wanted to ask the panel if they could comment on international work experience, in particular with nurturing young talent. So a lot of people in the room work in the exchange visitor world, where we're giving young people the opportunity to go and live and work and study overseas, and how that is assessed and valued by companies. Because I always think, you know, a lot of the things that you talk about, particularly on the emotional intelligence side, we see our participants just have an accelerated experience with that. And I've never really understood why companies don't focus on universities that provide the study abroad, you know, going straight to the study abroad centres, or alumni or opportunities where young people have taken that risk and gone overseas and developed skills. Yes, there are sort of hard skills where you can be taught something, but it's everything else that comes with that experience that then presents a young person. You know, how interested are companies in seeing somebody who's gone and taken that opportunity?
I'll jump in here. I'm a product of exactly what you talk about. I have the highest amount of respect for people who learn about the world from cultural exchange of any kind. But if the tone is not set from the top at an organization, it will not be paid attention to throughout most of the organization. And that does not mean the CEO, it means the entire management ranks and the board. And some organizations are myopic where that's concerned. They don't see that there's value associated with it. In fact, there's some that say, I don't quite understand, why didn't you stay in America doing what you're doing or whatever in your country? So it's a product of the leadership of organizations, in my opinion. I think continuing, as this organization does, to demonstrate and advocate for the intrinsic value associated with what a person learns by going and steeping him or herself in a completely different culture, how that gives you the agility and the mental flexibility and the cultural understanding. please continue to evangelize it because it is an incredibly valuable thing and undervalued in this country, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think we very much have I mean, look at it from America, but like we have a HQ perspective, you know, it's America and everybody else. And so therefore, if you're not doing it our way, it's the wrong way. But I think as we become more globalized and as people, this is why the cultural exchange is very important, because if you go to different industries, you go to different countries, there's different cultural nuances that will either make you successful or a super failure. And I think you have to understand those considerations, because I think if you go, like when I've traveled abroad, I recognize that I'm the sensitive American, I need to get over it, I'm somewhere else, and I need to kind of adapt to where I am. But it's hard to see it that way if that's not your business model, and you don't have a lot of international exposure, or if your HQ is so dominant that they have the loudest voice. Because again, we're talking about employee activism, if that's the dominant force, they don't care about this or that, they care about whatever their interests are. So I think it's going to naturally happen. Everyone's, you know, the world is flat. And the more we do that and the more we have international business, it's going to happen, but I think it's just a matter of time.
Thank you very much for the great questions. Thank you to our panelists, Jackie, Bernard, Steve, and Derek. We are going to take a 5-minute break, so 10:20, if you'll come back, please. Those chocolates on your chairs are very helpful. And I'll see you back in 5 minutes.